So once again, we decided to go on SS Tuning website to take a look at what's going on with the Mondeo and Fusion model enhancements. Again, we're talking 13 to 16 Ford Fusion USDM, Mondeo Sportback, or Mondeo in Europe. So website, of course, scrolling through their typical offerings. A lot of them are focused on focus, no pun intended, but there's also, of course, the option for Mondeo. So we've done the wide body kit or the fender flares, depending how you look at it. There are some other videos on this channel if you wanted to take a look at those. But here's their Mondeo short show car. This guy, I think on Instagram, is handle Mondeo Sportback, I believe. These guys are based out of Ukraine, Eastern Europe. Wanted to scroll through here, see what they have going on. Some additional flare accents, and then a few steering wheel options. Steering wheel is something that seemed like a really cool thing to do. So there are a few options they have on the site, targeted at some of the older generations. For the new generation of Mondeo, which is MK5, or the Fusion 13 to 16 here, we decided to not do the carbon because, well, that's just way too much money. Not that any of this is all that cheap, but also not being sure of how resilient to fade that carbon material is, and with the steering wheel against the windshield, what that would look like after about a year or so. Will it fade? Will it not? Not having certainty about how it'll hold up, so went with the leather option, which is right here for 680 euros, translated into dollars, probably about 750 or something like that, plus shipping. Very well put together wheel, at least based on the website pictures. You have leather top, perforated sides, that wheel alignment marker in the middle should be aligned right with the factory airbag, and LED lighting inside the wheel cluster. So all around seems like a pretty good option. Plus they offer ability to customize. So these red inserts on their website, that's actually something that we decided to do with the steering wheel for this Fusion. So should be interesting to see once we go ahead and order this and get it all in the mail. See how it pans out, how it feels, and if it's ultimately worth the money. So it took a while for them to manufacture it to spec. They do not typically carry inventory from what I understand, but the box arrived. It's UPS carrier. There it is, some of the typical Russian and maybe some Ukrainian writing on there. And here we go, opening the box. So again, nicely shielded from any damage. Some wrapping on top of wrapping. You know, I would rather deal with the hassle of having to unwrap something for 30 minutes than to have to try to replace any damages. So the wheel weight itself is actually very similar to the factory wheel. Not too much surprise there. I am doing this, of course, with one hand because I do not have the sophistication of having a GoPro mounted on my head or chest to use both. So, out of packaging, here it is. We already saw it on the website, but just an actual live view of that wheel, as opposed to just some perfectly taken pictures. You can tell this video is far from perfect, never mind using the wrong phone tilt orientation, but just the same, very, very nicely put together. In a side-by-side comparison, there's definitely a difference between the two wheels as far as the obvious look, but also the feel. So look-wise, you have that top part of the right-hand side custom SS tuning wheel having that race-style cutoff at the top as opposed to having the perfect circle. And you also have definitely thicker all the way around surrounding of the wheel. In fact, when you're holding the two wheels, it feels, and I didn't take exact measurements, but it definitely feels that the SS tuning wheel is at least 1.5 times thicker than the factory wheel, which gives you that additional nice kind of solid feel, but it is a little bit of a challenge initially to get used to. What I do want to point out, though, is that despite the YouTube videos out there that show how to take off the airbag and then ultimately the steering wheel, I did have a little bit of a difference for my setup for some reason or other when it comes to actual steering wheel removal. So the actual airbag removal was just as all the other videos say, as far as getting a very thin screwdriver or a screw or something like that to push through that bottom pin hole under the steering column. That was true. But most of the other videos out there also reference some kind of Torx type screw patterns, something like Torx 55 size, like one of those multi-star looking screw patterns. Maybe that's the case in some of the cars. For some reason or other, when I ended up taking off my airbag, what I came in contact with, depending on how closely you look here, is a pretty large typical hexagonal screw, which after doing a bunch of different measurements came out to be about 24 millimeters. Just so happens that I had a 25 millimeter socket, and it helped. It was a little bit loose, but it did help to loosen the bolt and then ultimately tighten it back on when I replaced the wheel. But just as a heads up, just because the YouTube videos out there tell you that it's one way doesn't necessarily mean that your car is set up that same way. So it may very well be the Torx 55 size attachment that you would need for a screwdriver or a wrench, or it could very well be a 24 millimeter screw and you need a socket for that. Or for all I know, there may be some other variation to this that I'm just not aware of. If anything, though, the airbag detachment was fairly straightforward, as well as putting it back on. Again, strongly recommend that you take a look at a couple of videos out there on how to do that, and make sure to disconnect the battery to prevent improper airbag deployment. If I had to pick anything as far as what I could improve about the wheel, I guess it would be, and it remains to be seen, the top part of the leather where you have that wheel alignment strip above the two perforated sides. It seems like fairly soft leather, and time will tell. The concern that I have is how that will stand up to fade, because it does feel softer than the factory wheel does. And I would definitely not recommend wearing, rings or jewelry, whatever, on your fingers if you are running your driving style with one hand at the top of the wheel, as opposed to your typical 10 and 1 o'clock positioning, or whatever, 9 and 3. 9 and 3 definitely is going to give you a true race feel because of the way the wheel feels. But at the top there, again, the leather is pretty soft, and we're going to have to see how that stands up to UV and how to ultimately keep the wheel in good shape, and whether any of the typical preservers that you put on the wheel, any kind of detail products or anything like that, help or actually end up breaking down the wheel. But hopefully none of those things happen. Again, this is not something that I have seen or have any reason to suspect necessarily, but just because the material feels and looks so different from factory, it was where I'm wondering if that's the way it's going to go. Again, we'll see. In the meantime, though, I feel it was definitely worth it. The car feels that much more responsive with the wheel on there. Again, I'm sure that's just in my head. Certainly looks cool, and gives that much more of confidence when you try to whip it around corners or into those tight hairpin turns. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thanks again for watching, and look forward to getting some more updates on some additional mods.